Hi everyone, good evening, and welcome to day number 55. I'm going to jump right in with the t-shirt. I've gone back to a Has-Been Hotel t-shirt, and the title of it is Radio Killed the Video Star, which is reversed from the song that most people know. It is a wonderful dynamic between a demon that runs radio and a demon that runs TV media. A lot of fun. Anyway, let's hop into today. Today became a really interesting combination of the usual list. Stabilization, theatrical pacing, coexistence, and apparently discovering that some parts of my brain still operate before sunrise, whether I approve of that decision or not. Today's session, I actually had a pre-session that started at 4:40 in the morning. This was not official. This was more like, I am awake. The base is online. The house is asleep. Let's see what happens if I quietly wander toward a microphone. I almost said microscope. Honestly, one of the strangest things about those early takes was that the bass itself was just there. Everything immediately as I wanted it. The volume was not quite as loud as I would normally do it during a session. And that's primarily because I enjoy remaining alive and not waking the household at 4:40, especially when they were all woken at 3:30. That's another story for another time. The resonance was fully online. Great buzz. It really let me start observing what the voice under absolutely relaxed conditions, instead of the heavily managed in the afternoon conditions, sounds like. And one of the more important things this morning was that the octave change no longer automatically destroyed the entire surrounding structure, the way it usually did. Now, did I make the octave in the morning? No, absolutely not. But the continuity around it survived much more naturally. So, on one pass, I tried carrying the bass continuity directly through the octave transition itself. And on the next pass, I basically went, okay, what happens if I stop trying to force this and just go straight through it relaxed? And, honestly, that already started setting up the entire day before the official sessions actually opened up. If I go to my color list, today was a gold day, which is more stabilization. And that started mid-morning. The continuity architecture itself was already kind of going already. It was mostly online. The energy line felt stable. Support was there. Entrances were there. Note placement was mostly there. I think it was Be Prepared first in the morning. But the playback was interesting because it sounded different than how it felt. What I listened to was a piece that sounded sluggish. It just sort of dragged a little. And it was strange because technically things were doing what they were supposed to. I knew my entrances were arriving on time. I knew I pretty well had the notes down and the support was actually in place. But emotionally, everything felt, like I said, dragging, slightly behind itself. And several realizations started surfacing almost simultaneously. Some of the words had become theatrically pronounced rather than naturally pronounced. As an example, sniff came off good. You won't get a sniff without me. It needed the energy to flow out of it a little more at the end. The decay was too quick to really be threatening. It had this, you won't get a sniff out of me. And it cut off too fast. And I knew I had to let that just sort of crawl across the floor. The first time I went through it, I did the octave change, and I listened to it, and I basically summed this octave change the first time out during the regular session as, wow, I really kind of feel sorry for whoever's doing that. Because even though the note itself is increasingly beginning to appear, the whole thing still sounds like straining and reaching and somebody trying to negotiate peace with gravity. So by the end of that playback, I had pretty much categorized the whole thing as definitely calibration. But then the session started becoming much more useful because it uncovered what was actually causing the sluggishness in the first place. And of course, I realized this after mangling some interesting lyrics. The lyric in question that I mangled in the first shot through, there were two. One is quid pro quo, which you're expected to take certain duties on board. There it is. Quid pro quo is one of those phrases that every time I get near it, I think I'm going to screw this up. And as I get closer to it, I stop thinking about it. I start thinking ahead of it. I drift through it, and I'm fine. Today, I thought about not thinking about it, and it just kind of crumbled, and then I went on past it. The other one, as I was coming down the high peak of the octave change, was saying that my teeth and ambitions are squared. Squared is earlier, my deliciously squared, be prepared. It's supposed to be my teeth and ambitions are bared. And for those of you who are really into English obscurity, that's a zeugma. Feel free to ask sometime. Anyway, I blew through some lines, and that was really, and it doesn't happen as much anymore. But between the takes, when I was trying to figure out why the dramatic pacing felt wrong, I suddenly realized something really important. The way that I had initially connected with this piece was beginning to find myself immersed in the video, singing to the other members of Voice Play. Somehow along the way, the theatrical environment in my head changed. See, I wasn't really envisioning the performance as the video anymore. I was envisioning it more like a vocal booth. So I was performing for the sake of performing. And that really changed the pacing, the emotion, everything. It wasn't where it was supposed to be. Because instead of existing with the other singers, the whole thing had become sort of isolated and theatrically legato, just sort of going through it, and it was very self-contained. Suddenly, the whole realization condensed into the following idea, and that was that I had the energy line, but the energy line was being filled effectively with the wrong kind of fuel. The intent behind it all was not matching the results I was hoping for. And I realized that when I have an energy line to maintain, I have to fuel the energy with the right kind of fuel before I go. And that really explained almost everything immediately. I had the continuity. I had the support. I knew the structure. The emotional propulsion system. The propulsion system was running on the wrong environment. So the next take became much less about technical correction. It was more about seeing whether I could get myself back in the theatrical environment and let everything continue to evolve instead of forcing myself to be paying so much attention to not paying attention to all of the different things. And that was what my goal was. I didn't quite get there. The way I can best explain it is, if you remember, especially in T2, there's an effect called a morph, where things basically digitally turn from one into the other. It's not a fade. It literally is one thing slowly transforms into this middle glop of both of them, and then turns into the other. Part of me was still in the booth, and part of me was in the video environment. Effectively, I was halfway through the morph. So things were moving in the right direction, but just not completely there. I will say, under this situation, for the first time, it wasn't a wrestling match or fighting each other. The reason I'm using morph is because I had gotten to a point that was literally something that was halfway of both at the same time. And the playback really validated that, because the sluggishness had really reduced down. It had almost disappeared. Entrances much more cleanly. The pacing was better. Everything started to move a little more naturally again. This, of course, once things are working better, always exposes the next monster living underneath the octave change. The octave region itself is increasingly behaving less like one hard note and more like a whole unstable bridge. So the first line increasingly gets to where I want it to go. It even begins to open up once I arrive. Sometimes it's almost started settling into place. Now, the second line, however, is still unstable enough that my brain has started inventing survival shortcuts. And to explain why, the first line is, "And seen for the wonder I am." And seen is that high note. However, it's seen for the wonder I am. It comes back down a little ways. The next line is, "Yes, my teeth and ambitions are bared." The problem is that yes is actually higher than seen. So it's seen for the wonder I am. Yes, my teeth and ambitions are bared. So I was trying to not ruin it by getting everything right in the point I wanted. I just needed to try to take it slowly. One of the short-circuiting methods was to bridge from that first line to that second line by not going for the upper notes. And then on the second line, my teeth and ambitions are bared, be prepared. The important thing there is, my teeth and ambitions are bared, be prepared. I was actually sliding back down a little early. So as my teeth and ambitions are bared, be prepared. And I listened to it, and it really just felt like I kicked the ladder out from under the second line, and it was falling in slow motion. I thought about having written that down, I went, oh, good. Lots of analogy today, lots of metaphor. But that may have been the clearest sign of the entire day. Everything is becoming understandable enough in my head that I am starting to visualize structures. I'm starting to comprehend what I'm doing while I'm doing it, instead of just feeling out what happened. It's not just emotional, it's technical comprehension of the emotional. Say that 10 times fast. So, of course, everything is now solved. No, not in the least. No, that would be no. Absolutely not. But one of the biggest improvements today was that the architecture itself held together under stabilization conditions without turning the session into survival mode. So what had been going on is the theater side of me had gotten to legato. So it wasn't just vocally things were drifting along. The emotional presentation was just sort of drifting along. And that was the entrances, the exits, moving from one dramatic state to another. All of it had really become overly smoothed, or smoothed over, or some combination of that term. Once that changed, the whole piece started moving more naturally again. And it was at that point I finished up because I was hungry. It was breakfast time. So later in the morning, Boulevard became its own really interesting session because instead of aggressively building things, a lot of it felt more like allowing the singing to emerge naturally instead of assembling it. One of the strongest observations came right at the beginning when I realized I could basically walk in the front door. And what that means is I start the piece by speaking the first word and then rolling into singing, because my spoken tone is closer to the tone I really would prefer when I sing. So it's a difference between starting and singing going I, and starting and speaking going I. So you just basically pick up the singing once you've engaged it. I walk. And that worked. It really made at least section 1 really level out. Even the lower I walk, that even evened out a good bit. The chorus did not feel like I was reaching for F4s today. They were just there. They existed when I needed them, and they existed where they were supposed to be. The bass line, section 2, it was almost a straight line. Usually it's behaved a bit more like a cobblestone road, but it's getting there. It's finally being paved over. Of course, the playback revealed all the missing vocal color and that slightly nasal quality that keeps surfacing when I sing. But one of the wonderful things was that even when the color itself wasn't fully there, the continuity underneath it was getting better. So the chorus, it went. However, in comparison to sections 1 and 2, section 3 had a little difficulty, because in that case I kind of walked in the front door and tripped over the welcome mat. The first note connected just beautifully, and then when I tried to transition to singing, it garbled and fell apart. I mean, we are immediately talking about the opening of the Dick Van Dyke Show. And yes, I will bet nobody watching this has any clue what I mean by that. If you know what the Dick Van Dyke Show is, let me know so I don't feel alone in being decrepit in age. Anyway, it was that stumble at the beginning. Section 4, it continued its long-standing tradition of being Section 4. At this point, I am increasingly convinced that Section 4 pretty much exists in its own small pocket dimension. What I feel when I'm performing it, which is stability and straight energy flow, sounds nothing like that in playback. So there is definitely some kind of disconnect between what I'm experiencing, what I'm projecting, and what's actually happening. Overall, today did feel much less like forcing the systems together. It was much more like allowing them to coexist long enough to reveal what they naturally want to do. And that is the healthy direction this process should be moving toward. And that was how that session went. I only did 2 takes for Boulevard because I keep forgetting that I'm doing so much of it that you forget the phrase, it's a marathon, not a sprint. I'm not going to go into explaining that metaphor, but it's just knowing how much energy to spend, how fast. That's going to be it for today. Tomorrow, that's a really good question. Originally, I was scheduled for Brighter and Be Prepared. However, my spouse and I are leaving around noon for a retreat that's about 3 hours away, and we're leaving Thursday and coming back Sunday. This retreat that we're going on may or may not have net. I will still have a bunch to pack in the morning, so I don't know if I'm going to have time to even do sessions in the morning. I hope I will. But I have to play things by ear. I'm going to bring my iPad with me, which is what I record on. Typically, I do the editing and everything else on a Mac, but we'll do it what we can. And if my daily check-in is just still alive, that's good. And now I've got the Portal theme going through my head. Anyway, as I said, every day as it comes. And thank you for being here. And until I show up again with a post, which at latest will be Monday, later.